Hey there YouTube, it's Nick with Feeding Fitness. Today I'm going to do a video on bulking basics. I'm going to explain what bulking is and the best way to go about doing it. So let's get started. What do we mean when we say bulking? I know you've all heard somebody say, yeah, I'm bulking up, I'm trying to get bigger. The idea when you bulk is to gain muscle, basically to gain weight. And you want that weight to be as much muscle as possible with as little fat as possible. That's the ideal, bulk. So a lot of times people hear this, especially if you're like someone like me or formerly obese or a lot of females, they just hear gaining weight and they automatically don't like it, they don't want to do it, they're afraid. There's no reason to fear bulking, there's no reason to be afraid. Also for ladies, just because we call it bulking does not mean you will look bulky. Don't worry about that. You lack the hormones to really look bulky. That's not an issue. But that's just what we mean by bulking, to put on weight in the form of muscle. Now a lot of you are thinking, well, why can't I just want to build muscle while I lose fat? I haven't lost enough fat. I'm not quite as lean as I want to be, but I do need more muscle. I'm looking kind of small. Let me do both at once. Well, that's the topic of an entirely different video. I've touched on it in the past in previous videos, but all I'm going to say right now is that it's not efficient to do both at once. Most people will not be able to lose fat while they're gaining muscle. Teenagers can pull this off, people on drugs can pull this off, but the majority of people will not be able to do it. I'm sure some of you have seen pictures of someone who gained 20 pounds, but they look leaner than when they started. And I'm not saying you have to be a teenager or on drugs for this to work, but most of you, this will not be the case. If this happens for you, great, more power to you, but you need to have some really superior genetics for that to be your case. Most people are not going to have that experience, so I don't want you to be set up for disappointment thinking that if you train hard enough or eat right, that can be your result. Most people cannot gain weight that way. I can't gain that weight that way. It didn't work for me, and it most likely won't work for you, but the method I'm going to describe is going to get you as close to that as possible. And if your genetics are right, it may just happen for you. And if so, great. But again, don't expect that. So, what do we need to do in order to put on muscle? Well, there are really two big factors. The first thing you have to do is eat in a surplus. You need to be eating more calories than your body is burning per day. So give the body excess, when the body has excess calories, it stores it. And it can store it in a variety of ways. It can be stored in glycogen, it can be stored as fat, and it can also be stored as lean muscle tissue. The body can use that excess energy to create a whole bunch of things, lean muscle tissue being one of them. Now you will never use your entire surplus only for lean muscle. This is what I'm getting at. You're gonna store some fat when you're bulking. But if you also add enough lean muscle mass, your aesthetics are going to improve even though you've gained some fat. But we'll get more into that in a second. So, caloric surplus, and the other thing you need to have is obviously weight training, resistance training. You can't just eat in a surplus and sit on your ass all day and hope to get muscular. It doesn't work that way. You've got to hit the weights and you should be on a decent program. Now, even the worst of lifting programs will gain you muscle if you're consistent and you increase the weight you lift over time. That's called progressive tension overload. Anytime you have a caloric surplus with progressive tension overload, you are going to be gaining, muscle. But if you use an optimal program, one that hits all body parts 2 to 3 times a week, your results are going to be superior to someone doing a suboptimal program. I'm not saying bro splits, one body part a day, Monday chest, Tuesday legs, Wednesday, those will still work and they will still give you results, and often good results if you're consistent and your diet is right. But hitting body parts 2 to 3 times a week where you're doing either 3 total bodies or an upper-lower split or a legs push-pull, those are just going to net most people better results. So, the key though is you have to have progressive tension overload. I don't care what kind of program you're on. If you constantly go into the weight room, put the same weight on the bar, lift it for the same number of sets, the same amount of times, you're not going to gain any muscle. You can't do that. You have to have progressive tension overload. Super important. So just add either weight or reps or sets over time. You don't have to add every time you go to the gym, but in the long run, you know, if you bulk for 16 weeks, you should be lifting more at the end of the 16 weeks than when you started. This is just one of the principles of adding muscle mass. So we need a caloric surplus and we need progressive tension overload. That's it. That really is the foundation of bulking. Now let me get into some of the finer aspects because, again, we don't want to get too fat when we're bulking. So let's go back and talk about that caloric surplus. How big of a surplus do we want? Now there are a couple of schools of thoughts here. Some people like the dirty bulk method. And when I say dirty bulk, it's got nothing to do with eating dirty foods or, you know, if you've watched any of my videos, I don't believe foods are clean or dirty. I think that's absolute, you know, garbage. When I say dirty bulk, I mean eating a large caloric surplus. Basically not paying too much attention to calories and just eating all the food in sight or maybe eating 1,000 calories over your maintenance. People will say that will help you add extra muscle and that you can always just cut the added fat off later. And while that's true that you can't always cut the fat off, there's not a ton of evidence to show eating with a huge surplus nets a lot more muscle. And it does mean you're going to have to cut longer. If you eat in a huge surplus, you're going to gain more fat. If you gain more fat, you're going to have to lose more fat. And the longer you have to be in a cutting phase, that's time you can't be in a bulking phase and you're not making your sweet, sweet gains. For me, I like to minimize fat gain during a bulk. One, because it helps me look better. Two, because it means that the cut I have to do after the bulk can be shorter and I get right back to bulking. Now, personally, I like to bulk 9 months out of the year if I can. If I can spend 3/4 of the year in a surplus, that's great. But if my surplus is huge, I'm not going to be able to do that. So what is the right surplus? Well, I'm going to say for men, you want to be gaining 2 pounds a month tops. If you're an intermediate or an advanced and you've already gained a fair amount of weight, 1 to 2 pounds, you know, maybe even closer to 1. Ladies, half those numbers. 1 pound a month if you're new, half a pound to a pound if you're intermediate to advanced. Now, the first thing when somebody told this to me when I first read this, I thought, how in the world do I keep track of those numbers? 1 to 2 pounds a month? That's very hard to monitor that because we all have, you know, daily fluctuations in our weight. I fluctuate 2 to 3 pounds every day. So how am I going to keep track of this? Well, I talked about it in my video on weighing yourself every day, right here. That's going to be your best bet, is to weigh daily and then use software to get like an average loss and a trend. That way it'll tell you when you're averaging half a pound gain per month, you know, like that. That's really the only way I can conceivably monitor such a small increase in weight. If you're just trying to step on the scale every day, you're going to drive yourself mad. So don't do that without putting it into context. So that's how I monitor my weight gain. You almost have to use software. So how long should you do a bulk for? I personally feel anything less than 12 weeks is a waste. Now, why is this? Well, first, you can't jump right into a bulk, especially if you've been in a deficit. You need to be at maintenance for a couple of weeks, give your body time to adjust, and then start adding in the calories. Plus, it'll take you a couple of weeks to figure out where your calories really need to be to lock into that nice 1 to 2 pound gaining per month. So it's going to take time to get that. And once you finally have everything together, you know, ride that out for a while. You want to get your money's worth on this bulk. I think anything less than 12 weeks is a waste because you've spent so much time just trying to get your calories right. Stick it out 12 weeks. If you can go longer, even better. Personally, I go 24 weeks minimum. You know, if I have to cut early because I'm gaining too much fat, I'll do that, but I usually try and ride it out. Just because I think it's more efficient to bulk longer and then just do a nice hard aggressive cut off that fat and jump right back into bulking. That's the way I like to do it. But really, to me, anything less than 12 weeks is a waste. So your first go around, you might want to shoot for 12 weeks. It might be just right because like I said, most people kind of screw up their first bulk and gain a little bit more fat than they intended. So if you set your goal at 12 weeks, reassess. If you like what you've done, you didn't put on more fat than you're comfortable with, go another 12. And if you did, just cut it off, lesson learned, and start again. You know, do your cut and then just bulk again and be a little more conservative with your calories. The more and more you do this, the more you'll know where you need to be eating. And the last thing I want to say is, as time goes on and the longer you bulk, don't be surprised if you need to slowly add calories. Just like when you're cutting, you know, you might lose weight for a while and then you kind of plateau and you have to keep reducing calories. The opposite is seen when bulking. Sometimes you might be gaining steadily at 3,500 calories a day, and then all of a sudden you go 4 weeks and you don't gain any weight at all. Well, it's time to up the calories a little bit. That's okay, that's expected. So this is again why I think you need to lengthen your bulks if you can. So that is basically the basics of bulking. Go slow, don't be in a rush, you don't have to gain a ton of weight. Even gaining 4 or 5 pounds of muscle is going to make a noticeable difference in your physique. So don't go crazy, don't dirty bulk, you're just going to regret all the fat you have to lose in the future. But also, know that you are going to gain some fat, and that's okay, because as long as you're putting on decent muscle mass with the fat, your end result is going to look much, much better. So those are the basics on bulking. If you have specific questions, ask them down below, and if they're good enough, I'll do a whole video explaining the concept. If you liked the video, please give it a thumbs up. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Join us over at Facebook at facebook.com/feedingfitness, and I'll see you guys next time.